Welcome to it. Food manufacturer Libster Holdings reported their financials today, showing that revenue outpaced inflation in the 6 months to end June. But they have warned that the pressure on SA consumers is becoming more evident. To give us a full picture on the numbers, we are joined by Robin Smith, who is the commercial director at Libster. Robin, thank you so much for your time. I mean, how would you characterize the period under review?
Look, I think you've summed it up there in one sentence. You know, there certainly is pressure on the consumer's wallet. We've certainly seen that. And we've also seen a change in consumer patterns and buying patterns. A lot more in-home consumption, leads to sustainability within formal retail. So I think those are the main themes that we saw coming out of the 6 months. Of course, as well, looking at rising input costs quite substantially in the first half of the year. Fortunately, I think most of those input costs are in the system already, and we don't see too much of that coming through in the second half of the year.
On that note then, what were some of the highlights for you when you look at the performance by sales channel?
Well, I think overall in our food operations, which is 93% of our total revenue, we were very pleased with the performance. Total food revenue up over 10%, as well as EBITDA, cash operating profit, up over 10%. So very happy with our food operations, and those were driven by our two main categories. The first being perishables, and there one of our businesses, Finlaw Foods, which faces the food service and quick service restaurant industry, saw a big turnaround in the first 6 months of this year versus the hard lockdown period in the first 6 months of last year. So we're seeing food service starting to recover, not quite to the levels pre-pandemic, but recovery nonetheless. And then our groceries division, with local supply of imported products, as well as our Cape Herb and Spice division, with a strong export performance in the first 6 months relative to last year's performance, where we had logistical problems in getting containers out of the ports, as well as imports into the ports.
Right. You mentioned in your results statement that despite the restructuring efforts at Denny Mushrooms, low production yields have continued to impact the business unit. What will be the priorities for the second half of the year to turn that part of the business around from your perspective?
Well, most of the production woes happened at our Fasantacral farm in the Cape. And there are any number of initiatives in place to improve the yields at that particular facility, and we think that most of those plans are well underway, and we should start seeing the yields improve at that particular facility. So we're fairly optimistic that we'll be able to turn that supply issue around before the end of the year.
Perhaps you can give us a little bit more clarity or color on this. I mean, I was looking at your household and personal care side of the business. Revenue down 9.6% and volumes down 17.4%. What can we read into that when it comes to consumer demand? Is it a case of stockpiling? Is it a case of consumers not really needing the bleach and the stuff that they required last year? How are you interpreting that figure?
Exactly that, Nastasia. I mean, last year we saw a lot of almost panic buying of hand sanitizers and bleachers and surface cleaners and the like. And so the first 6 months of last year were buoyed by that kind of COVID activity. This year, the demand for those sort of products is well off. And I think, people are returning to almost normality when it comes to those kind of purchases. In addition to that, we saw some heavy input price pressure, cost pressure, which in a competitive sector was very difficult to pass on to the customer. A lot of those price increases have subsequently gone into the system, and so we should see a better turnaround going forward. I think another big reason was that our service levels to our key customers came off quite substantially as a consequence of a big restructuring move, whereby we're moving 4 factories and 4 facilities into one large factory. And I think that physical move led to a decrease in service levels.
Right. Let's talk about your capital projects. A majority of them are, performing at expected revenue levels. However, Millennium Foods and Amaro, they are behind expectation. What are some of the challenges you're experiencing on that front, and how much of those challenges are in your control?
Well, Millennium Foods is in the prepared meals category, and prepared meals is a category that's not growing as fast as we had intended. And the payback on those capital projects is expected to be a little longer. Having said that, we have seen a turnaround there. As with our Amaro bakery, the main issue there was the Parbake frozen plant, and we've seen the use of that plant for other products, and the utilization is coming through. And so in the second half of the year, we should see a better return on those two capital projects that you mentioned.
Speaking of the second half of the year, what are some of your expectations, and what will you and the team be working on?
Well, I think, we continually look at our cost base to see where we can take out cost. We want to improve our cash generation, and I think just focus on what we do best, being innovation, staying ahead of the game in terms of category management, and looking forward to the improvement in the food service industry as that gradually opens up, and then improving the returns from the large capex products that should see us coming through in the second half of the year. So we remain cautiously optimistic about our fortunes in the second half of this year.
Robin, thank you so much for your time. That is Robin Smith, who's the commercial director at Libster, talking to us about the period under review and also highlighting some of the challenges that consumers are experiencing. Moving on now and looking at the